A September in 1998, off the coast south of Marseille, an 18-metre fishing trawler called the Horizon tosses back and forth like a pinball in the waves. Captain Jean-Claude Antoine Bianco pushes himself off one bulkhead, crashes against the one opposite, and slithers down onto the bench. Braced with his forearms on the bolted down table, he peers through the bled grey gloom at the digital clock, screwed to the wall opposite. It spells out the time in red matchsticks, 2:05 p.m. The sky outside is like a big fat bruise. All he hears sucking and heaving. A clink, a hiss, a background roar. Nets in and an hour back to port with whatever mullet and squid they could salvage from the day. Clattering on the companionway, a snort. Habib, his second mate. We found something in the net. He sets a blackened, wet, heavy thing on the table in front of Jean-Claude. He handles the metal chain, rubs away at bits of crud and grit through scratches and nicks. Silver, turned black underwater. His hands catch something else, a groove, an imprint, a name. It was an ID bracelet. This belonged to Saint-Ex. Habib's nonplussed reaction is jarring to Jean-Claude. His second mate was the only man in France who hadn't heard of the celestial Saint-Ex. France knows how to raise its literary stars onto a pedestal and beyond to godlike status. And they also know how to insistently shorten words, phrases, and names. So, Antoine, Marie, Jean-Baptiste, Roger, Comte de St-Exupéry was pruned down to Saint-Ex. Perhaps today we'd have called him X-Man. You probably don't need me to tell you that Antoine de St-Exupéry, or Saint-Ex as we'll be calling him today, is the author of one of the best-selling books of all time, The Little Prince. First published in 1943, it sold over 140 million copies and counting. But what was an ID bracelet belonging to its author, doing in a fishing net, pulled from 130 feet of water off the coast of Marseille? Welcome back to Panda Pen Club. Today, we'll explore not only the reason Saint-Ex's bracelet came to be in Jean-Claude's net, but also the tragic secret of the man who claims to be responsible for putting the bracelet and its owner, Saint-Ex himself, to rest beneath the waves. And, of course, we'll be reviewing a fountain pen as well. Now, I'm not about to whip out a Mont Blanc. I mention Mont Blanc, of course, because of the juggernaut that is Le Petit Prince Aviator Collection, which includes no fewer than several models of pen, and a few other bits of dingly-dangly whatnot as well. Today's review does not concern itself with those, or any of the other lucrative products produced under license by the Saint-Exupéry estate. One remarkable thing about the pen in today's review is, in fact, the approachable pricing. For a fountain pen of, as we'll see shortly, this caliber and reliability, it is pretty low. Around $20 in the US or £20 in the UK, and a fair bit cheaper on Etsy at the moment. So, given this pen isn't coming at a premium, why am I drawing a line, so to speak, between it and the remarkable, philosophical, interplanetary novella about love and friendship and what it means to be alone, with which others have gone to such costly lengths to conjure an association for the purposes of peddling their gimcrack? Well, because today's pen, like the eponymous Little Prince, is in fact a spacefaring pen. Or at the very least, one that alludes to flight. A moon man. Indeed, perhaps our pen hails from another world. Another strange world. Like the Little Prince, whose planet, we are told, was hardly bigger than a house. Its name? Asteroid B612. According to the Little Prince, the asteroid has been sighted only once by telescope in 1909 by a Turkish astronomer who had then made a formal demonstration of his discovery at an international astronomical congress. But no one had believed him on account of the way he was dressed. Grown-ups are like that. Oh, you mean the name of the pen. Today's pen is, of course, the fabulous and distinctive Moonman M2. A combination of letters and numbers, M2, that may as well signify an asteroid themselves. Incidentally, however, M2, in the realms of space-bound meaning, refers not to an asteroid, but to a globular cluster in the constellation Aquarius, which is part of the Gaia sausage. Intergalactic naming conventions are quite literally all over the place. I love it. So, although the M2 does not officially link itself to the Santex Classic, I do. And Panda Pen Club vehemently believes that beauty is truth. And since beauty is also in the eye of the beholder, we're bound in our sometimes wearying pursuit of beauty, and thus the truth, to commit to ploughing onwards, irrespective of sense, opinion, calculation, or plangent attempts at intervention by strangers or loved ones. Onwards, and indeed upwards, in our pursuit of perspective. The Moonman M2 has that kind of special something, an insinuated sense of panache, pizzazz, or indeed style, that generates either curiosity or buttock-clenching enthusiasm in most fountain pen users. To some eyes, it's gimmicky, drearily, predictably retro. But for me, the whole presentation, the trim box, the natty pipette, the sculpted, moulded resting places for the latter, and the construction of the pen itself spews forth an aura of quality. And there are two aspects to this coup de je ne sais quoi. One, the shape. Two, the transparency. As Jeff Abbott points out on thepenaddict.com, there's nothing quite like a completely transparent pen to really fascinate our eyes. The retailer, andyspens.co.uk, with whom I am not affiliated, refers to it on their website as a classic torpedo, which I'd like to dispute vehemently, but briefly. After a stimulating afternoon in my local library, browsing their admirable selection of books and manuals on torpedo design, torpedoes are much more on the blunter side of the coin than the Moonman M2. No! The M2 is not a submarining fountain pen. It is aerial, or possibly spacebound in its nature. A rocket, perhaps. We'll sidestep the fact that the M2 doesn't actually fare too well on an aeroplane, and with my travel habits anyway. But then few fountain pens, particularly eyedroppers, do under such circumstances. The M2 more or less begins, like many successful spacecraft, with the command module. And in this case, that's a tapering stump of beautifully transparent, highly preoccupying solid acrylic. This is at the top of the cap, and it's a great place to witness the distorting effect of the acrylic when peered through with the naked eye like some sort of carnivalesque magnifying glass. But then, if we'd read The Little Prince, this is exactly what we might expect from any of the polished surfaces in our lives. And now, here is the secret, says the thoughtful fox, who inexplicably appears in chapter 21 of The Little Prince. A very simple secret. It is only with the heart that one can see rightly. What is essential is invisible to the eye. So, all is distorted, unless you see with the heart. Beneath the command module, we have a segment with a more definite purpose. This hollow zone for housing the nib, which we'll perhaps call the service module. Mine does get a bit splattered on occasion, and the answer to that is a bit of nursing with a Q-tip or cotton swad or bud or whatever these dear little things are called. The cap in screws in 1 and a nudge rotations. And you can see the threads through the cap. And there is the interesting matter of the cap band. And then, of course, the rest of the pen and its features, which I'll get onto in a moment. But first, let's take a step back and look at the overall pen, as it were, as a whole. As it is. It's rocket, not torpedo-like, tapering. There's no clip, further enhancing the aerodynamical shape of the pen. It's clear, sparkling, funhouse transparent. In some ways, it's quite original. It catches the light. What also springs most readily to my mind, anyway, from all of this, is the invisible plane belonging to Wonder Woman, which is, of course, perhaps an analogue to the more recent stealth and cloaking technology used in various cool modern aircraft. Wonder Woman was, of course, a contemporary of St-Ex. Both of them were World War II aviators, trailblazers. Unlike Wonder Woman, however, St-Ex, unfortunately, did not have the advantage of an invisible plane. Born in Lyon on 29th of June 1900, much less possessed of stealth technology, the planes St-Ex flew, which would be in the 1920s, planes like the Breguet 14 may well have looked and smelled much more like the Peugeot 205 my mother used to cart my brother and I around in when we were kids. While St-Ex spent his childhood living in a chateau, he came from a family of impoverished aristocrats, meaning he had the title of Comte or Count, but he had to get a ruddy job like the rest of us. Among other things, the job landed by the Comte de St-Ex was for Aéropostale, but he was not merely a pilot. He was a pioneer, one of the early airborne mailmen who were truly gripped and consumed by the idea and sensation of flight. They needed to be. This was a white-knuckle profession for the passionate, desperate, suicidal, thrill-seeking, what will be, and I mean it, frontiersman. St-Ex and his comrades were piloting at a time when aircraft were rudimentary. Weather forecasting was largely a combination of mad guesswork and squinting miserably at the horizon, licking your finger and seeing which way the wind's blowing. I'm not sure, but it all sounds lethal. What were these planes like? We're talking wooden propellers, and definitely bugs in your mouth, screaming into the abyss, open cockpits. These darling devices flew along at a stately cruise of 80 miles an hour. Radio? Suspension? Instrumentation? Brakes? Yeah, right. There was room for improvement in the realms of aviation at this time, you might say, and so there was. Over the course of 6 years, St-Ex upgraded from a Breguet 14 to a Latte Coeur 25 and 26, and ultimately the closed cockpit 28. A similar urge to improve was evidently felt quite recently by the good men and women at Moonman, because they've provided us with an upgrade to the M2, which I have dutifully purloined via, of course, the mail for the purposes of this review. Now, what are these upgrades to the new M2? First off, the section is metal and comes in all these sort of frosted colours with matching coordinated belt bands. And these belt or section bands were much feted and admired on the prior M2. They came in any colour you liked as long as it was red. And the updated M2, however, is a sort of, relatively speaking, giddying kaleidoscope of possibilities. And as before, the wording on the belt band cheerily and helpfully reminds us, Moonman. The earlier M2 iteration had a clear plastic section which allowed you to see the nib fittings and the feed. In the new version, arguably, this part of the pen is a little more sort of boring, elegant, others might say. Mine is lavender, a sort of milky purple, Easter eggish sort of colour. The great advantage of the new section is the bitey finger grip it offers. There's a whisker more heft to the updated version of the M2 compared to the prior one. One thing I would love to do with Panda Pen Club when one day I get my act together is reenact a sort of judgment of Osiris for each pen. Today, you'll just have to content yourself with my approximate hand weighing without the watchful eye of Thoth, god of scribes, to supervise. For a while, I was also adamant that the new M2 was a hair's breadth longer than the prior version, but I'm definitely wrong about this. M2s only sported a fine or extra fine nib. If you don't rate any of the nib options available to you from Moonman, you are always at liberty to do what Reddit rabbit Pennyways did, which was install an extravagant alternative nib onto your M2. Each to their own. Each to their own. Meaning, I think people who do things you wouldn't contemplate or wouldn't have thought of, provided they're not hurting anyone, are treasures to scoop up and hug, or at the very least peer at. Saint X and his fellow airmail pilots often confronted sandstorms, heavy rain, fog, snow, freak winds, and even tribesmen in the Sahara who shot at their planes and held airmen hostage for weeks when their planes inevitably crashed. What made them do it? Was it pure machismo, snortaceous, galumphing testosterone? Well, what the airmen were doing wasn't idiotic, for one thing. For another, the explanation doesn't quite work, simply because it wasn't just men who were at it. And then, of course, you have Saint X, whose experiences flying mailbags on the Toulouse to Dakar route foreshadow one of the most touching and soulful works of literature on the planet. The narrator is a pilot whose plane crash lands in the Sahara Desert. There he encounters the first person he could really talk to, the little prince. So was there something purer at work among these pilots? Well, Saint X certainly thought so. Reflecting in 1939, transport of the mails, transport of the human voice, transport of the flickering pictures. In this century, as in others, our highest accomplishments still have the single aim of bringing men together. Delivering mail had taken on a sense of cosmic imperative. Not everyone agreed. One US post office pilot described their mission to deliver the mail as the Suicide Club, for example. Saint X, who clearly also felt some sense or awareness of this insanity, asked, by virtue of what emotion do we risk our lives, sometimes so casually, to move the mail? Saint X welcomed his upgrade to a closed cockpit and the other advanced comforts of the Laticoair 28 by declaring, Aeropostale has lost much of its charm since the advent of reliable motors. Now our engines are foolproof. Frankly, flying under these conditions is a bureaucrat's affair. Christ. Like Saint X, Moonman seems to think that there's something precious to be found in simplicity, in the old ways of doing things. This is reflected in the Moonman M2's billing system. It is, like many other Moonmen, an eyedropper pen, and this means you fill using the provided eyedropper. You can't use cartridges. The payoffs are the vast ink capacity of 2.5 millilitres or more, plus the ability to see your ink and, in a sense, use it to decorate your pen. You get to extend the lovely ritual of occasionally filling the pen up, unscrewing the section, drawing ink into the eyedropper from the bottle, shooting it into the reservoir and closing up the pen again. And if you find that intimidating, or you find yourself worrying about the mess, well, think of Saint X and his pioneering comrades and just give it a whirl. Saint X also seemed to know that mundane little tasks, like filling a pen, were perhaps the true business and maybe even meaning of life where it was to be found. He said that the mailbags he carried constitute the dogma of the religion of his craft, the torch which in this aerial race is passed from runner to runner. What matter, though, they hold the scribblings of tradesmen and nondescript lovers? Poetic, yes, but practical too. What saves a man, he said, is to take a step, then another step. It is always the same step, but you have to take it. To the mundane business of my own scribblings with the M2. My new M2, the F, has this lead pencil feedback thing, along with a certain sort of afterthought of blushing softness. The older M2s I have exhibit something similar, but I'm afraid with EF nibs, they all tend to feel the same with me. It's a bit like I'm a 40-a-day smoker, fresh off a heavy weekend, being served a freshly plucked raspberry and being asked to detect all the notes and hues in the flavour. Maybe my pen palette is too ravaged or inexperienced, or both, to distinguish the subtle pleasures of textural feedback from an EF nib. I've mainly used it to write letters. It seems apt. And somehow it's conducive to rambling and reveling and carving out a portal to someone you love. My letters aren't always prettily written. Sometimes in a card or something, I make a special effort. But I don't subscribe to all this glittering perfection some people are into with their lettering. My letters may not be exquisitely shaped, but I hope to manage to make them mean or say what I mean. And then when words fail, you can either wait until you dream up something else to say or write, or you can draw a picture. The postscript to this letter from Saint X to irascible artist Hedda Stern, written in 1943, read, "A nuisance delayed this letter that did not leave. But to be very honest, I'm so proud of my masterpiece that I send it to you anyway. Try not to worry too much. It doesn't matter a jot." In 1943, Saint X joined a squadron of the Free French Air Force to fight with the Allies in World War II. Physically, by this point, he was unfit. Technically, he was over the age limit. He was drinking also heavily to blot out years of injuries. He was not keen to learn all the bells and whistles of the Lockheed Lightning P-38 he now flew. On 31st of July 1944, Antoine de St-Exupéry's plane disappeared over the Mediterranean, south of Marseille. Over 60 years later, in 2008, another strange aspect to the mystery of Saint X emerged. After our friend Jean-Claude, captain of the Horizon fishing trawler, found Saint X's bracelet, diver Luc Van Rel discovered the wreckage of his plane. Spread over half a mile, it's thought to have hit the water at more than 500 miles an hour. Alongside the wreckage was the engine of a Luftwaffe plane, shot down months earlier. Van Rel began working with Lino von Gartzen of the Bavarian Society of Underwater Archaeology, who made over 1,200 phone calls to former Luftwaffe pilots searching for clues to Saint X's disappearance. And then in 2008, he contacted Horst Rippert, a Luftwaffe airman, and explained he was researching the disappearance of the great author. "You can stop researching now, because I shot down Saint-Exupéry," was the response. The German pilot recalled that Saint X had been a straightforward target, flying lazily at 6,000 feet. He was looking around. He wasn't bothered by my presence. Rippert and other members of his squadron, listening in to American radio traffic, quickly learned that there was a search being conducted for the best-selling author's plane. Realizing what happened, they vowed to stay silent. Rippert had been an admirer of Saint X's work ever since he was a schoolboy. "At school we all read him and adored his books," he said. "He knew how to describe the sky, the thoughts and feelings of pilots. His work drew many of us to the profession. If I'd known it was him, I would never have fired." Saint X, observing the devastation of World War II, and perhaps in particular the occupation of France, was deeply disappointed with the world and the way it was being conducted. Here's a powerful passage from his wartime writings, 1939 to 44. "Somewhere along the way we have gone astray. The human anthill is richer than before. We have more wealth and more leisure, and yet we lack something essential, which we find difficult to describe. We feel less human." And sometimes I concur with the narrator of The Little Prince. Grown-ups are certainly very, very strange. But thankfully, inside every grown-up is a child. And inside every child are infinite possibilities. Stay easy. Let your mind roam. And with the Moonman M2 or any other pen you choose to tell your adventure, remember to keep the faith and stay in touch with the universe within. In the face of an overpowering mystery, you don't dare disobey. Absurd as it seemed, 1,000 miles from all inhabited regions and in danger of death, I took a scrap of paper and a pen out of my pocket. If you enjoyed watching this video, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Panda Pen Club on YouTube. Thank you so much for watching.